Have you ever judged someone in an instant, based only on the clothes they wore or the color of their skin? What if that very person, the one you laughed at, the one you humiliated, held your future in their hands? Tonight, witness the story they never saw coming, where cruelty backfires and pride crumbles in the most brutal, public way imaginable. Watch carefully, because after this, you may never look at a stranger the same way again. Amara Lewis pushed open the gleaming glass doors of Stratton Realty with a soft breath, the chill of the New York morning still clinging to her simple gray coat, her modest flats making barely a sound against the marble floor. Heads turned immediately, the lobby buzzing with murmured judgments cloaked behind forced smiles and sideways glances. Her natural beauty, radiant, yet understated, her brown skin glowing in the cold light, but her lack of designer labels louder than any scream. A man in a sharp navy suit nudged his colleague, smirking. New admin. Looks like she got lost on her way to the service entrance. The receptionist's eyes darted up and down Amara's outfit with a thinly veiled sneer. The security guard lingered too long near her ID badge, as if second-guessing its authenticity. But Amara, unbothered on the surface, gave a polite nod and made her way toward the elevators. Inside, she pressed the button for the 35th floor. The floor where corner offices gleamed and million-dollar deals were closed, with handshakes and champagne. The elevator ride was silent, save for the tightening in her chest, a sensation she'd long grown familiar with, the subtle but constant hum of being measured, weighed, and silently dismissed. When the doors opened, her entrance into the main office felt like a drop of ink in a glass of milk, contaminating their pristine world. Around the open concept, workspace heads rose from sleek monitors, assessing, judging, dismissing all in a glance. A woman with icy blonde hair and towering stilettos leaned over to her friend, her voice a whisper, but designed to carry. Honestly, HR is getting sloppy, hiring charity cases now. The other woman laughed behind her manicured hand. Amara heard it all, but didn't flinch. She walked calmly to her assigned desk, a modest corner tucked away from the gleaming windows and conference rooms. Her desk bore no welcome card, no fresh company mug, just a stack of contracts and a terse email from her supervisor waiting in her inbox. Her presence was a silent offense to the curated image Stratton Realty prided itself on. Her very existence, a disruption to their carefully polished hierarchy. Amara knew it, felt it sink into her bones, but she also knew something they didn't. Something that made her lips press into the faintest of smiles as she powered on her computer and began her first day. It didn't take long before the whispers grew teeth. As Amara moved through the office with careful efficiency, she heard the snickers behind her back, felt the pointed glances like needles against her skin. A junior associate named Blake smirked loudly one afternoon, tossing a crumpled coffee cup toward her desk, missing deliberately and laughing. "Hey, new girl, might want to grab that. Wouldn't want the place looking low rent." The comment earned a round of chuckles. No one bothered to hide it. Amara bent down slowly, her fingers brushing the paper, her spine straight, despite the sting in her chest. In the cafeteria, conversation stopped whenever she entered, leaving a vacuum of frozen smiles and narrowed eyes. A woman named Sierra, draped in designer cashmere, fake whispered, "I heard she rents a basement room in Queens. Poor thing must think she's on the come-up now." Another chimed in, "At least she's getting free coffee. That's luxury for her." Their laughter chased her back to her desk, where even the janitorial staff, emboldened by the culture of disdain, treated her with condescension. Meetings were no better. When Amara tried to contribute ideas, the senior brokers talked over her, stealing her words and dressing them up in expensive jargon. Her emails were ignored. Her reports were credited to others. Her mistakes, however minor, were magnified and gossiped about in hushed, gleeful tones. Even the HR manager, a brittle woman named Diane, with a perpetual frown, seemed to look through her as if Amara were already a ghost haunting their marble halls. On a rainy Wednesday, Amara approached her supervisor, a balding man named Craig, about an overdue project she had rescued. He waved her off without looking up, muttering, "Stay in your lane, sweetheart. Leave the big deals to the real players." The words stung sharper than she expected, but Amara swallowed them down, like she had so many others. Behind the glass walls of the executives' offices, laughter rang out. Champagne flowed to celebrate another closed deal, but not for her. Never for her. She was an invisible blemish on their spotless brand, a living contradiction to their self-congratulatory myths, and they made sure she felt it every single day. Yet beneath the quiet hurt, beneath the constant gnaw of humiliation, something fierce burned in Amara's chest, something they would never see coming. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon. The office buzzed with the frenzied energy of an upcoming deal. Executives paraded through the halls, shaking hands, their laughter sharp and brittle, like shattering glass. Craig stood at the center of it all, red-faced with triumph, as he toasted to another record-breaking sale. Someone suggested an impromptu celebration in the atrium. Champagne bottles were uncorked, the sparkling liquid spraying into the air like victory itself. Amara lingered near the back, unnoticed as usual, clutching a stack of overdue files they had dumped on her desk just an hour before. Craig's booming voice called out suddenly, his eyes locking onto her with cruel amusement. "Hey, Amara, why don't you grab a mop while you're at it? Can't have the floors getting sticky." The crowd erupted in laughter, loud and vicious. Even the receptionist doubled over. Even the interns pointed. Even the janitor shook his head with a smirk. Heat rose to Amara's cheeks, but she stayed rooted, her fingers tightening around the manila folders until her knuckles turned white. Blake swaggered forward, brandishing a champagne flute, his grin lazy and merciless. "Or maybe she's waiting for a tip. That's how they do it, right?" he said, flicking a coin at her feet. It rolled in a lazy circle, the metallic sound slicing through the cruel laughter like a blade. Diane from HR pretended not to hear, pretending harder still, not to see the coin spinning like a cruel joke at her feet. Amara inhaled slowly, deeply, every part of her screaming to walk away, to disappear. But she didn't move. She stood there, still as a mountain, their taunts swirling around her like a storm. Sierra clinked her glass against Blake's, sneering. "Give her a break, guys. She's just trying to network up the food chain. Shame there's no ladder low enough for her." The laughter reached a fever pitch. Cameras were out now, snapping photos, filming clips, ready to upload the moment to their private group chats, where Amara would become the newest punchline, a living meme of poverty daring to invade their polished world. Craig took a step closer, smirking down at her. "You'll never belong here, sweetheart. But thanks for keeping the desks clean." The words dripped with venom, the final lash across skin already raw. The atrium's glass ceiling caught the late afternoon sun, casting long, cruel shadows over the scene. Amara's heart pounded against her ribs, not from shame, but from the storm gathering inside her, a storm they had no idea was about to break. The air shifted before anyone understood why. The doors at the far end of the atrium opened with a whisper, and in walked a man who seemed to command the very air around him. Damian Cole, sharp in a charcoal suit that looked casually thrown on, but cost more than most of their salaries combined. His presence was an earthquake wrapped in silk. Every head turned, laughter dying mid-breath. Craig straightened his tie nervously. Blake shoved his hands into his pockets. Sierra dropped her phone with a soft clatter. Damien's gaze swept the room once, cold and assessing, then stopped, pinning Amara where she stood, her dress simple, her shoes worn, her dignity shining brighter than any crystal chandelier above them. A murmur ran through the crowd, questions forming but no one daring to ask them. Damien crossed the distance in measured strides, each step echoing louder than a gunshot in the stunned silence. Without a word, he reached her. His hand cupping the side of her face so gently the room seemed to tilt. His thumb brushed a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. And then he turned, facing the sea of shocked, silent faces, his voice calm, but lethal. "This woman you mocked, you humiliated," he said, each word striking like a hammer, "is Amara Lewis Cole." He paused, letting it sink in, letting their faces blanch with horror. "My wife." Gasps ripped through the atrium. Someone dropped a glass. The sound, sharp and shattering. Craig staggered back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Blake turned pale. Sierra's hands flew to her mouth, eyes wide with dread. Damien's jaw tightened as he scanned the crowd. "And as of this morning, following final negotiations," he continued, pulling a slim folder from inside his jacket and tossing it onto the nearest table, "I am now the majority owner of this company." The folder slid open, revealing the signed contracts. The ink still fresh, the board's approval stamped and sealed. The room reeled. The walls themselves seemed to close in, the weight of their cruelty turning into the weight of their consequences. Amara stood silent, regal, untouchable, the truth gleaming from her, like armor. No designer brand could have matched the sheer power of her quiet presence. No wealth could have bought the grace with which she endured them. And now, she did not need to endure them anymore. A ripple of confusion swept the room as Damien turned slightly, his hand never leaving Amara's, his voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "It's not just that I own the company," he said, pausing as if savoring the tension choking the air. "As of today, the full operational control, the hiring, the firing, the restructuring," his lips curved into something that was not a smile, "belongs solely to Amara Lewis Cole." The silence shattered into stunned gasps. Craig stumbled against a chair. Blake muttered a curse under his breath. Sierra swayed on her heels, their faces draining of color as the realization struck like a thunderbolt. Amara was not just the wife. She was not just some silent partner, tucked away in a gilded cage. She was the boss, the queen, the hand that would now decide their futures. Damien squeezed her hand once, a silent offering of strength, before stepping back, giving her the full stage. Amara lifted her chin, her eyes fierce and unblinking. "Effective immediately," she said, her voice steady and cutting through the stunned crowd like a siren in a storm. "There will be changes." Craig's jaw tightened. Blake looked around as if searching for an escape. Sierra's phone dangled uselessly from her fingers. Amara's gaze swept across them all, not with vengeance, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "This company," she continued, her words deliberate and precise, "will no longer be a playground for prejudice, for cruelty disguised as ambition, for small minds hiding behind big titles." The floor seemed to tilt, the chandeliers above flickering as if the very air rebelled against the old order. Amara stood unwavering, a storm in human form, beautiful, righteous, unstoppable, and the kingdom they had mocked her from was now hers to rule or raise. They had laughed at her, they had dismissed her, they had humiliated her, and now they stood before her, stripped bare by the truth, their fates hanging in the balance, waiting for her judgment. Craig opened his mouth to speak, But Amara raised a hand, a simple gesture that silenced him more effectively than any shout could. Her voice rang clear and cold. "Craig Peterson, effective immediately. You are terminated for conduct unbecoming, harassment, and perpetuating a toxic work environment." Craig staggered as if struck, his protest dying in his throat as two security guards stepped forward, firm but professional, escorting him toward the exit without ceremony. The employees watched in stunned silence, their gazes flickering between Amara and the guards, realizing the old world they had clung to was crumbling before their eyes. Blake tried to blend into the crowd, but Amara's gaze pinned him like an arrow to a target. "Blake Summers, you will vacate your position effective today. Your behavior has been documented. Your disdain for basic decency leaves no place for you here," Blake cursed under his breath, his bravado evaporating as security approached. Sierra gasped, her manicured hand flying to her chest, her voice a trembling whisper. "Please, Amara, I didn't mean—" But Amara's eyes held no pity, only the weight of 1,000 indignities carried in silence. "Sierra Adams, you fostered cruelty. You led whispers and laughter like daggers against your own colleague," Amara said, her tone almost mournful. "There is no seat for you at this table anymore." Sierra's knees buckled slightly, tears pricking her eyes, but the guards showed no hesitation, escorting her out alongside the others. The remaining employees watched, their hearts pounding, as years of silent injustices were dismantled in real time. Amara turned to the room, her presence filling every corner. "If you ever questioned whether kindness mattered, whether character outweighed connection, look around you," she said, her words etched into the air. "Today, cruelty has consequences." The heavy double doors closed behind the expelled, the sound final and reverberating like a judge's gavel. In the new silence, Amara stood tall, her simple dress and steady gaze outshining the polished marble and glass of the building. She hadn't needed wealth to command this room. She had needed only the truth, and now that truth stood undeniable. In the silence that followed the reckoning, Amara turned her gaze toward the few who had stood apart from the cruelty. Her voice softened, but carried the same unwavering strength. "Not everyone here chose mockery," she said, and the crowd shifted, uncertain. There were those who, even in a culture of disdain, chose decency. Her eyes landed on Elena Martinez, a junior assistant who had once slipped Amara a cup of coffee on a rainy morning. A kindness unnoticed by most, but not forgotten by Amara. "Elena," she said, her voice warm like sunlight after a storm, "you showed humanity when no one was watching. From today, you are promoted to Senior Operations Coordinator." Gasps rippled through the room. Elena's eyes widened, tears threatening, as she placed a trembling hand over her mouth, a quiet sob escaping. Amara's gaze moved next to Jamal Brooks, a security guard who had nodded respectfully to her every morning, without fail. Even when others ignored her presence. "Jamal, integrity doesn't need a stage, and you have proven that you are being promoted to head of security for the entire East Coast Division." Jamal's shoulders straightened, pride flickering across his face. He placed a firm hand over his heart, in silent gratitude. "Kindness," Amara said, sweeping her eyes across the room, "is a currency that never devalues. Loyalty to human dignity is what builds an empire worth inheriting." Murmurs of realization flowed like a current through the remaining staff. The hierarchy they had clung to, the false idols of appearance and pedigree, were burning down in front of them, and from the ashes, something stronger, purer, was rising. Amara stood centered in the marble atrium, a quiet force reshaping the very soul of the company, the same company that had tried to shame her into silence. But today, kindness was crowned, and cruelty was cast out. Under the soaring glass ceiling of the atrium, Amara stepped forward, a single spotlight catching the soft shimmer of her simple blouse. The sea of faces before her now stripped of arrogance, waiting, uncertain. She took a slow breath, her voice rising steady and clear. I was never less because I wore simple clothes. I was never less because I didn't boast. Your respect should never have depended on wealth or status or skin color. A hush fell so deep, it seemed the entire city had gone silent. Respect, she continued, her brown eyes sharp as blades, is owed, not awarded like a prize for appearances. She lifted her chin, her silhouette framed by the golden afternoon light filtering through the glass. I do not stand here today because I seek revenge. I stand here because dignity matters, because what we tolerate becomes our culture, and I refuse to let cruelty be the culture of my name, my family, or this company. A tremor rippled through the crowd, some bowing their heads in shame, others blinking back tears. Amara's voice softened, but lost none of its gravity. I do not need your validation. I do not need your approval. I have always been enough. She placed a hand over her heart, steady and sure. And so are all those who have ever been judged by their clothes, their bank accounts, their accents, or the color of their skin. A quiet energy built in the room, a storm of unspoken reckoning and rebirth. Today is not the end, Amara said, her voice lowering to a vow. It's the beginning of a new standard, one built on respect earned by how we treat others, not by how loudly we flaunt our titles. She stepped back then, letting the silence crown her, letting the truth settle into every soul watching. And for the first time, the building that had once been a temple to vanity became something else entirely, a place where worth was measured, not in wealth, but in humanity. The building breathed differently now, the walls no longer echoing the hollow laughter of arrogance, but resonating with something purer, something real. Amara walked through the marble lobby, her footsteps light but firm, sunlight spilling through the tall windows and gilding the floors in molten gold. Employees watched her with a mixture of awe and quiet reverence, no longer seeing a girl to ridicule, but a woman to respect. The toxic whispers that once polluted the air had been silenced, replaced by a charged stillness that hinted at change. She paused at the entrance, turning back to glance at the towering glass and steel behind her, the empire her husband had entrusted to her hands, and that she had, in turn, transformed. It was no longer a fortress for the entitled. It was becoming a sanctuary for the worthy, for those willing to build something based on merit, kindness, and dignity. Outside the doors, a fresh breeze stirred the trees lining the avenue. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Amara smiled, a true, unguarded smile that reached her eyes, a smile born not from victory over others, but from victory over cruelty itself. She stepped into the sunlight, her simple dress billowing gently around her legs, the city before her wide and alive with possibility, a future unwritten, but already brighter, because of one woman who had refused to bow, to break, or to become bitter, behind her. The new plaque shimmered against the stone wall, engraved with a single word, a promise, a commandment for all who entered after her humanity. Beneath the open sky, Amara stood before a small crowd of employees, and press gathered for the rebirth of the company, her voice steady, rich with emotion that needed no theatrics to be heard. "Let today be the day we bury the sickness of judgment," she said, her eyes sweeping the faces before her. "Let it be the day we decide that dignity is not worn like an accessory. It is lived. It is breathed. It is owed to every human being, regardless of skin color, clothing, or background." The air held its breath, heavy with the weight of her words. We are not our bank accounts. We are not the brands stitched on our sleeves. She continued, her voice cutting through the morning light like a blade of hope. We are what we choose to be when no one is watching. We are our kindness, our decency, our respect for the quiet dignity of others. Her gaze hardened slightly, her fire unmistakable. Mockery is easy, she said. Cruelty is cheap, but decency, true decency, that takes strength. She lifted her chin, sunlight crowning her like a halo. Today, this company, this city, this world will move forward, she said, not carried by greed or privilege, but led by those brave enough to believe that humanity is the only wealth that matters. A hush fell over the crowd, not the awkward silence of guilt, but the awed stillness of awakening. Somewhere, a phone camera blinked red, live streaming her words beyond the walls, across the streets, into homes where a little black girl might be watching and daring to dream bolder. A young boy might see and believe deeper, and the ones who had sneered might, just maybe, begin to question the ugliness they'd once accepted without thought. Amara smiled, not for applause, not for fame, but because she knew the truth had been spoken, and the truth, once set free, was unstoppable. A spark that no mockery could extinguish, a fire that would burn in hearts long after the headlines faded. They thought they were stepping over someone invisible. Instead, they tripped over their own arrogance and fell into a pit they dug with their hatred. Amara didn't just reclaim her dignity. She shattered the illusion that status makes worth. Remember this, every sneer, every whisper, every judgment you cast could be carving your own downfall. Because the world is watching, history is recording, and karma does not forget. Will you be remembered for your humanity or your cruelty?